She was just an elderly woman quietly taking her seat in first class, expecting nothing but a peaceful flight. But within minutes, a flight attendant stood over her, eyes cold, voice sharp. "You need to move. First class isn't for you." The woman tried to explain, her ticket proof that she belonged there, but the attendant didn't listen. She didn't even look. Then, 5 minutes later, she was the one being removed from the plane. What happened in those few moments turned an ordinary flight into a national scandal. And by the time they landed, one career was over for good. Before we start the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss one. She held onto the handle of her small suitcase, her fingers pressing against the worn leather as she stepped into the airport terminal. The soft hum of conversations, the rolling of luggage wheels against the polished floors, and the distant crackle of announcements filled the air. Eudora Hale, a retired schoolteacher in her late 70s, had traveled plenty of times before, but today felt different. Maybe it was the excitement of seeing her granddaughter after so many years, or maybe it was just the weight of time settling in her bones. Either way, she was ready to board her flight and rest in the seat she had paid for. She reached the check-in counter and handed her ticket to the agent, a young woman with a polite but hurried expression. The woman scanned it, nodded, and gave a quick smile. "You're all set, Ms. Hale. First-class boarding will begin soon. Enjoy your flight." A quiet sense of pride settled in Eudora's chest as she tucked the ticket back into her purse. First class. It wasn't something she indulged in often, but this trip was special. She wanted to be comfortable. She had spent years working, saving, making sure her family had everything they needed. Now she allowed herself small luxuries, and this was one of them. The waiting area filled up quickly as passengers arrived, some talking in hushed tones, others glued to their phones. She adjusted the strap of her purse on her shoulder and kept her eyes on the boarding gate. The minutes passed, and soon, the announcement echoed through the speakers. "Passengers flying first class on Flight 382 to Atlanta. You may now begin boarding." She stood, gripping the handle of her suitcase, and made her way to the front. A few other first-class passengers stepped forward as well. Businessmen in sleek suits, a young couple whispering to each other, a woman wearing oversized sunglasses and scrolling through her phone. No one paid her any attention, and she didn't mind. She handed her ticket to the gate agent who scanned it and gestured toward the jet bridge. As she walked down the narrow passage, she felt the familiar rush of cool air from the plane's entrance. A flight attendant stood at the door, greeting passengers with a practiced smile. Madison Keene had been a flight attendant for almost a decade, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who thought they ran the cabin. She nodded at the first few passengers, her expression pleasant but distant. Eudora stepped inside and walked toward her seat in the first-class cabin. She placed her purse on the seat and carefully tucked her suitcase into the overhead compartment. The seat was soft, wide, and welcoming. She eased into it, letting out a quiet sigh. The last few days had been exhausting, but now she could finally relax. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small photo, a picture of her granddaughter Amara when she was little, standing outside her childhood home. She traced the edges of the photograph with her thumb before tucking it safely back inside. Just as she settled in, a sharp voice cut through the quiet hum of the cabin. "Excuse me, ma'am. I think you're in the wrong seat." Eudora looked up and found Madison standing beside her, arms crossed, a slight frown on her face. The woman's uniform was crisp, her hair pulled back into a neat bun, and her name tag gleamed under the overhead lights. Eudora reached for her ticket, her expression calm. "I believe this is my seat." Madison didn't even glance at the ticket before shaking her head. "First class is reserved for paying passengers. Are you sure you didn't mean to sit in the main cabin?" For a moment, Eudora thought she had misheard. But then she saw the way Madison's eyes scanned her, the slight hesitation in her posture, the way her tone carried something unspoken. It wasn't about the ticket. It wasn't about a mistake. She straightened her back, her fingers tightening around the small piece of paper. "This is my assigned seat." Madison sighed, clearly growing impatient. A few passengers nearby had turned to look, some curious, others pretending not to hear. The woman leaned in slightly, lowering her voice but keeping the authority in her tone. "Let's not make this difficult. I can help you find your real seat." A slow burn settled in Eudora's chest. She had been polite. She had followed every rule. And yet, here she was being asked to leave a place she rightfully belonged. She exhaled through her nose, steadying her voice. "I won't be moving. I have my ticket, and this is where I'm supposed to sit." Madison's expression stiffened. It was clear she hadn't expected resistance. She straightened, adjusting her uniform. "I'll be right back," she said curtly before turning on her heel and walking toward the front of the plane. Eudora remained seated, her fingers resting on the armrest, but her thoughts were anything but calm. The whispers around her grew quieter, the energy in the cabin shifting. She could feel it, the weight of every gaze, the silent judgment, the passengers waiting to see what would happen next. She had done nothing wrong, but somehow, she already knew this wasn't over. Eudora sat still, her back straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The air around her felt heavier now, the silence pressing against her like an unseen force. She could feel the glances from the other passengers, some watching in quiet curiosity, others quickly looking away, unwilling to get involved. It was always the same. People saw, people knew, but no one ever spoke up. Madison marched toward the front of the plane, her heels clicking against the carpeted floor. She pushed past another flight attendant, Jonas Reed, a younger crew member who had been checking the galley supplies. He frowned at her sudden movement. "Everything okay?" Jonas asked, adjusting his tie. Madison huffed. "There's a woman in first class who shouldn't be there. I told her to move, but she's refusing." Jonas glanced over Madison's shoulder, spotting Eudora sitting calmly in her seat. His brows furrowed slightly. "Did you check her ticket?" Madison rolled her eyes. "I don't need to check it. I know a mistake when I see one. She probably switched seats with someone, or maybe she belongs there." The voice came from behind them. Captain Reuben Vaughn had stepped out of the cockpit, his sharp blue eyes settling on Madison with quiet scrutiny. He was a seasoned pilot, a man who had spent more years in the sky than some of his crew had been alive. He didn't tolerate unnecessary drama on his flights. Madison stiffened at his presence but quickly masked it with a professional stance. "Sir, I believe there's been an issue with seating. A woman in first class." Mrs. Hale, Captain Vaughn cut in. Madison blinked. "You know her?" The captain nodded, his expression unreadable. "I've flown her before, more than once. She's a respected customer." Jonas exhaled through his nose, crossing his arms. "Sounds like her ticket is legit, then." Madison's fingers twitched slightly. I still need to confirm. I don't want passengers getting the wrong idea." Captain Vaughn's gaze hardened. "The only wrong idea here is making a passenger feel like they don't belong." For the first time, Madison felt a flicker of unease. She was used to controlling situations like this, used to making quick decisions and moving on. But now, under the weight of the captain's stare, she could feel something slipping. Still, she forced a polite nod. "Understood, sir. I'll handle it." Without waiting for further discussion, she turned and made her way back toward first class. But this time, her steps weren't as confident. Eudora hadn't moved an inch when Madison returned. The older woman simply looked up, waiting. Madison inhaled sharply, her voice softer but still carrying that forced authority. "I'm going to need to see your boarding pass." Eudora didn't hesitate. She reached into her purse, pulled out the crisp ticket, and handed it over without a word. Madison scanned the details, her throat tightening when she saw it. Seat 3A first class confirmed. She had been wrong. The realization settled in her stomach like a heavy stone, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she forced a tight smile and handed the ticket back. "Thank you, just making sure everything is in order." Eudora accepted it, slipping it back into her purse. Her gaze remained steady, her face calm, but there was something in her eyes, something that told Madison that she knew exactly what had just happened. Madison turned stiffly and walked away, her cheeks burning. But as she moved back toward the front of the plane, she failed to notice the young woman across the aisle, Celeste Navarro, who had been recording the entire exchange on her phone. And Celeste, she wasn't the kind to stay silent. Celeste lowered her phone slightly, her heart beating faster than before. She had seen things like this happen before, quiet moments where someone was treated unfairly, dismissed or questioned just because they didn't fit someone's idea of where they belonged. But this time, it wasn't just a fleeting moment. It was happening right in front of her, and she had the proof in her hands. She glanced toward Eudora, who sat still, composed, but there was something in the way her hands rested on her lap that told Celeste this wasn't new to her. The older woman had experienced this before. She wasn't surprised. Celeste turned her gaze toward the front of the plane where Madison had disappeared, likely trying to brush off the situation. She clenched her jaw, her fingers tightening around her phone. If the flight attendant thought she could treat someone like that and move on as if nothing happened, she was wrong. Meanwhile, up front, Madison stepped into the galley, pressing a hand against her forehead. She hadn't expected to be corrected, not by the captain, not by Jonas. It made her chest tighten. She had been working in first class for years, handling high-profile passengers, making sure everything was in order. It was her space, her authority, and yet, in just a few minutes, that old woman had made her look like she didn't know what she was doing. She needed to regain control. Straightening her uniform, she stepped back out, scanning the cabin. The other passengers had settled in, most returning to their books or devices. It was fine. This would be forgotten by the time the plane was in the air. But then, she caught movement out of the corner of her eye. Celeste was tapping her phone screen. Madison frowned, stepping forward. "Excuse me, ma'am, what are you doing?" Celeste barely glanced up. "Just checking my messages." Madison narrowed her eyes. "I'd appreciate it if passengers didn't record crew members during flight preparations." Celeste met her gaze fully this time, her expression unreadable. "Oh. I thought airlines encouraged passengers to document their experiences." Madison's stomach flipped. There was something deliberate about Celeste's words, something that made her uneasy. Celeste leaned back in her seat, casually adjusting her phone in her grip. "I guess it's only a problem when the experience doesn't look good, huh?" Madison clenched her jaw. "Just focus on getting ready for takeoff, ma'am." She turned and walked away, trying to shake the discomfort crawling up her spine. But as she stepped into the galley once more, she pulled out her own phone and quickly checked the airline's customer feedback page. Her breath caught. A video, just a few seconds long, had already been uploaded. The title read, "Elderly Woman Harassed for Sitting in First Class. Flight Attendant Doubts Her Ticket." And the view count? It was climbing by the second. Madison's fingers tightened around her phone as she watched the numbers rise. Comments were already flooding in beneath the video, some questioning what had happened, others outright condemning the way Eudora had been treated. "What's going on?" Jonas's voice broke through her thoughts. He had just finished checking the last of the passengers and had returned to the galley, catching the troubled look on Madison's face. She locked her screen quickly and forced a neutral expression. "Nothing. Just checking something." Jonas raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "You sure? You look like you just saw a ghost." Madison exhaled sharply. "It's fine. Let's just get this flight in the air." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't fine. She had been in this job long enough to know how fast a bad passenger experience could spiral out of control. The airline took public perception seriously, especially when social media was involved. If this video kept spreading, it wouldn't just be a conversation between her and the captain anymore. The corporate office would get involved. And if there was one thing Madison couldn't afford right now, it was bad attention from the higher-ups. Back in first class, Celeste watched Madison disappear again before turning her phone screen toward Eudora. "Excuse me, ma'am. I just wanted to check in. Are you okay?" Eudora turned, a soft smile touching her lips, though there was something guarded in her eyes. "Oh, I'm fine, sweetheart. Thank you for asking." Celeste hesitated before speaking again. I saw what happened. It wasn't right. Eudora sighed, her fingers smoothing over the fabric of her dress. It never is. But people like me learn how to handle it. We don't always get to argue. Sometimes it's easier to let things go. Celeste's jaw tightened. That's the problem, though. You shouldn't have to handle it. You shouldn't have to prove you belong. Eudora gave her a knowing look, one filled with years of experience, of battles fought quietly, of moments just like this one that had come and gone. That's the way the world is, dear. But that doesn't mean people don't change. Celeste sat back in her seat, feeling the weight of Eudora's words. She admired the woman's patience, but she wasn't sure she could match it, because as she refreshed her phone screen, she saw that the video had now been shared by an airline watchdog account. And within minutes, things would no longer be under Madison's control. Madison's stomach twisted as she tucked her phone back into her pocket. The view count was climbing, but she needed to focus. The plane hadn't even taken off yet, and she couldn't afford to let this situation spiral further. If she kept her head down, did her job, and acted like nothing had happened, maybe, just maybe, this would blow over. She straightened her uniform and stepped back into the first-class cabin, determined to act as if everything was normal. But the moment she did, she felt the shift in energy, the quiet stares, the subtle way passengers had turned their bodies slightly toward the aisle, as if waiting for something to happen. It wasn't outright defiance, but it was enough to make her uneasy. Eudora sat still, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. She wasn't sulking, she wasn't making a fuss, and yet, her presence alone carried a quiet strength that made Madison feel unsettled. Celeste, on the other hand, was anything but quiet. She caught Madison's eye and gave her a knowing look, one that sent a silent message. This isn't over. Madison ignored it, clearing her throat as she moved to check on another passenger. But just as she turned, a new voice entered the mix. Excuse me, miss. Madison paused. An older man sitting a row ahead had leaned slightly into the aisle. Frederick Lane, a distinguished-looking gentleman in his 60s, was watching her with mild curiosity. He had the air of someone who had spent a lifetime in business, someone who had seen power shift from one person to another more times than he could count. Yes, sir? Madison asked, keeping her voice neutral. Frederick gestured toward Eudora without directly looking at her. I happened to overhear what happened earlier. I was wondering, was there an issue with this lady's ticket? Madison felt her spine stiffen. No, sir, everything has been sorted. Frederick nodded slowly, tapping his fingers against the armrest. I see, it's just... I fly first class all the time. I don't recall ever seeing anyone else get questioned like that. A flicker of heat rose to Madison's face. Sir, we check tickets when necessary to ensure passenger comfort and security. Frederick raised an eyebrow, his tone cool. I don't doubt that. I was just wondering if it was necessary this time. The air in the cabin grew heavier. Madison clenched her jaw, forcing another polite smile. Sir, if you have any concerns about airline policies, I encourage you to file a report with customer service. Frederick gave a slight chuckle, shaking his head. No need for that. Seems like the internet is handling it already. Madison's breath caught for a split second, but she kept her face composed. Please let me know if you need anything else, sir. She turned quickly, walking toward the galley before she could hear any more comments. Her skin burned as she gripped the counter, breathing deeply. The weight of it all was pressing down on her now. The video, the whispers, the fact that the passengers weren't just forgetting about this. Then, her worst fear came true. The in-flight phone rang. She stared at it for a second, her stomach twisting into knots. No one called the crew line before takeoff unless it was urgent. Slowly, she picked it up. This is Madison Keene speaking. A deep voice on the other end made her blood run cold. This is Daniel Henshaw from Airline Corporate Relations. We need to have a conversation about the incident on board. Madison swallowed hard, gripping the phone tightly. The voice on the other end was calm but firm, the kind of tone that meant there was no room for excuses. Ms. Keene, we've received multiple reports about a situation involving a first-class passenger. Can you confirm what happened? Daniel Henshaw's voice carried the weight of authority, and Madison knew that whatever she said next would be scrutinized. Her mind raced. She could try to downplay it, make it sound like a minor misunderstanding. But she had already seen the video spreading online. Corporate had clearly seen it too. She cleared her throat, keeping her voice steady. There was a brief issue with a seating confirmation, but it's been resolved. A pause. That's not what we're seeing. Madison felt the heat rise to her neck. Sir, I was simply ensuring that all passengers were properly seated according to airline policy. And by doing that, you singled out an elderly black woman in front of the entire first-class cabin? Her breath hitched. The way he said it, direct, factual, without any sugarcoating, made it hit harder than she expected. Ms. Keene, Daniel continued, do you understand the severity of this situation? This isn't just about one complaint. This is about how our airline is being perceived at this very moment. We have a video circulating online with thousands of views. We have passengers on this flight who are aware of what happened. We have an internal review team already compiling reports from the captain and crew. Madison's fingers dug into the counter. This wasn't going to go away. Sir, I was only doing my job. That's exactly the problem. If this is how you believe your job should be done, then we have a serious issue. The words landed like a slap. Effective immediately, you are to be relieved of duty for the remainder of this flight. Madison's stomach dropped. What? You will remain on board as a passenger, but you are no longer authorized to act in any capacity as a crew member. Another attendant will take over your responsibilities. When the flight lands, you will report to management for further action. She felt lightheaded. This was worse than she had expected. Sir, please, This is not up for discussion. His voice was final. Captain Vaughn has already been notified. You will comply. The call ended with a sharp click. Madison stood frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear even though the line had gone dead. This couldn't be happening. She had worked for this airline for years. She had built a reputation. And now, because of one passenger, one moment, she was being stripped of her authority in front of an entire cabin full of people. She turned her head slowly, catching Jonas watching her from the other side of the galley. His expression was unreadable, but there was no sympathy in his eyes. He had heard everything. Before she could say a word, the intercom crackled to life. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Vaughn. We will be departing shortly. Flight attendants, please secure the cabin for takeoff. Jonas stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. I'll take over from here, Madison. You should find yourself a seat. Her throat tightened. Jonas, it's done. And just like that, Madison Keene was no longer in control. Madison stood there, gripping the edge of the galley counter as the reality of the situation sank in. The airline had stripped her of her authority mid-flight. She had been humiliated in front of her own crew. And now she had no choice but to sit among the very passengers who had just watched her fail. Jonas gave her a pointed look. I suggest you take your seat before the captain asks why you're still standing. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, to insist that this was all being blown out of proportion. But the weight of the moment held her back. She wasn't in charge anymore. She wasn't the one making the rules. Without another word, she turned and walked stiffly toward the first-class cabin. The moment she stepped into the aisle, she felt the stares. They weren't loud. No one spoke, no one pointed. But the silence itself was deafening. It was a shift in power she had never felt before, one she had spent her entire career making sure she never experienced. She kept her eyes forward, moving quickly, her breath shallow. But then, as she passed by Eudora, the older woman glanced up and met her gaze. There was no smugness in her expression, no gloating, no satisfaction, just quiet observation. Madison clenched her jaw and kept walking, but her pulse was erratic. She felt the stares from Celeste, from Frederick, from passengers who had witnessed the entire ordeal. She reached an empty seat near the front of the economy section, slid into it, and stared out the window. For the first time since she put on her uniform all those years ago, she felt small. Meanwhile, in first class, Jonas walked up to Eudora's seat, his demeanor calm and professional. "Mrs. Hale, I just want to personally apologize for what happened earlier. It was unacceptable." Eudora gave a small smile. "That's very kind of you, young man. But I've been on this earth long enough to know that words are easy. Actions are harder." Jonas nodded, understanding the weight of what she was saying. "I can promise you this. What happened won't be ignored." Celeste, still holding her phone, looked between them before speaking up. "It already isn't." Jonas turned slightly, catching a glimpse of her screen. The video had skyrocketed in views. Thousands of comments, retweets, and news outlets were already picking up the story. Celeste smirked. "Seems like the world is watching." Eudora simply exhaled, glancing toward the front of the plane where Madison sat stiffly in her seat. The flight had barely begun, but for Madison Keene the turbulence had already started. The quiet hum of the engines filled the cabin as the plane began taxiing down the runway. But inside, there was a different kind of tension. One that had nothing to do with turbulence. The moment Madison sank into her economy seat, she felt the weight of it settle on her chest. This was never supposed to happen. She had always been the one with authority, the one in control, the one passengers were expected to respect. But now, she was just another passenger. She could still feel the stares, the way passengers in first class whispered, the occasional glances from the economy section as people discreetly checked their phones. The video was spreading, and she was at the center of it. She folded her arms tightly, keeping her eyes fixed on the seat back in front of her. If she just made it through the flight, maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to salvage this before it completely destroyed her career. But deep down, she knew. The damage had already been done. Meanwhile, back in first class, Celeste refreshed her feed and nearly laughed under her breath. The video had now been picked up by multiple social media pages, and some airline watchdog accounts had already started tagging the company's official page, demanding a response. She turned her phone slightly toward Eudora. "You're famous, Ms. Hale." Eudora chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Famous isn't what I was looking for. I just wanted to sit in the seat I paid for." Celeste nodded, understanding completely. "Well, the internet has other plans. People are angry. The airline's going to have to respond soon." Just as she said it, Jonas approached again, kneeling slightly so he was at Eudora's level. He kept his voice low, but there was sincerity in his tone. "Mrs. Hale, I wanted to check if there's anything we can do to make this flight more comfortable for you. A meal preference? A drink? Anything at all?" Eudora studied him for a moment before smiling. "I appreciate it, young man, but I don't need special treatment. I just wanted to be treated like everyone else." Jonas nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling in his chest. He had seen unfair situations play out before, passengers ignored, assumptions made, but rarely had he seen the tables turn so quickly. Before he could respond, a familiar voice crackled through the overhead speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Vaughn speaking. We've now reached our cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. We expect a smooth flight today with minimal turbulence. In the meantime, please sit back, relax, and enjoy your journey." Jonas sighed, knowing there was still work to do. He gave Eudora a polite nod before heading back to the galley. As he did, Celeste smirked. "I bet Madison isn't relaxing right now." Eudora's lips twitched slightly. "I expect she's learning something, though." Back in economy, Madison stared blankly ahead, her hands gripping the seatbelt strap. The first few minutes had been bad enough, but now she felt completely exposed. The uniform that once gave her authority now felt like a weight pressing down on her. Then a sudden voice caught her off guard. "Excuse me, miss." She turned sharply to see a man in the seat beside her, a father with a young daughter resting against his arm. He looked hesitant, almost apologetic, but his words cut deeper than he intended. "Aren't you supposed to be working up front?" A fresh wave of embarrassment washed over her. She forced a tight smile, shaking her head. "I was reassigned." The man gave an awkward nod, sensing the tension, and quickly turned back to his daughter. Madison exhaled slowly, her grip on her seat tightening. This was going to be the longest flight of her life. Meanwhile, inside the airline's corporate office, Daniel Henshaw sat at his desk, reading through the growing number of reports coming in. He had already watched the video twice, and each time, his expression had darkened. He turned to his assistant. "Has the PR team drafted a response?" The assistant nodded. "They're working on it now, but honestly, sir, this isn't just an online issue anymore. We've got customers calling in. People are threatening to boycott. And," she hesitated before adding, "we just got a direct complaint from a VIP member, the one involved in the incident." Daniel's jaw clenched. "You mean Mrs. Hale?" She nodded. She didn't make a big scene, just asked for clarification on why she was singled out. But considering her loyalty to the airline, Daniel rubbed his temples. This is bad. He grabbed his phone, scrolling through the internal contacts until he found what he was looking for. Dominic Carter, Senior Vice President of Flight Operations. With a deep breath, he pressed the call button. Because now, this wasn't just Madison's problem anymore. This was about to go all the way to the top. Madison shifted in her seat, her breath uneven as the reality of her situation settled deeper. The uniform she had worn with pride for nearly a decade now felt like a heavy burden. She could still hear the murmurs around her, the subtle glances passengers gave her when they thought she wasn't looking. She wasn't used to this feeling, being observed, judged. She was always the one with the authority, the one giving instructions, the one people were supposed to listen to. Now she was just another passenger, and she hated it. She folded her arms, gripping them tightly as she looked toward the front of the plane. Jonas had taken over her responsibilities, moving effortlessly through first class, checking on passengers with ease. It stung. She had been the one who ran things here, the one who made sure every detail was in order. But now, someone else had stepped in without hesitation, without struggle, and it was as if she had never been needed at all. She turned away, exhaling sharply. She just needed to get through this flight. She'd find a way to fix it, to explain things when they landed. Maybe it wasn't too late to salvage her career. But then, her phone vibrated in her pocket. She pulled it out hesitantly, her stomach clenching when she saw the notification at the top of the screen. Breaking news. Airline faces backlash. After passenger removed from first class, over alleged discrimination. Her breath hitched. She tapped the article, her eyes skimming through the text. A video circulating on social media shows a flight attendant questioning an elderly black woman's seat in first class, despite her having a valid ticket. The flight attendant has since been removed from duty mid-flight, and sources say airline executives are now involved. Customers have already begun calling for an investigation. The comments below the article made her throat tighten. This is exactly why we need accountability in air travel. This woman has probably flown more times than that flight attendant has even worked. Disgusting. The fact that they pulled the FA from duty mid-flight means they know she was in the wrong. Madison clenched the phone in her hand, a bitter taste filling her mouth. It wasn't just spreading, it was exploding. She scrolled further, seeing that the airline's official account had already begun receiving thousands of mentions from angry customers. And then, her stomach dropped. A statement had been released. She read the words slowly, each one tightening the grip around her throat. We take all customer concerns seriously. The incident involving a first-class passenger on Flight 382 is under immediate review. The crew member in question has been placed on leave pending further investigation. Our airline remains committed to ensuring all passengers are treated with dignity and respect. Her heart pounded. Placed on leave? That meant they weren't just planning to talk to her when she landed. They were already making moves to remove her completely. She glanced around, suddenly feeling like the walls of the plane were closing in. She had seen other employees get fired before, sometimes over the smallest mistakes, sometimes over incidents that weren't even their fault. But this was different, because there was video proof. And once the public got involved, the airline wouldn't hesitate to cut her loose to protect its image. She could feel her pulse in her ears as panic began to claw its way up her throat. She turned her phone off, shoving it deep into her pocket, as if that would somehow make all of this disappear. But it wouldn't. Meanwhile, back in first class, Eudora sat quietly, her hands resting on her lap. The plane was peaceful now, but there was an undeniable tension lingering in the air. She could feel it, the way some passengers avoided eye contact with her, the way others gave her quiet nods of acknowledgement. She wasn't sure how to feel. She had spent a lifetime experiencing moments like this, some subtle, some blatant, all of them exhausting in their own way. But never had one played out so publicly. Never had the consequences come this quickly. Celeste, sitting across from her, tapped on her phone before glancing up. Looks like corporate finally responded. Eudora raised an eyebrow. What did they say? Celeste smirked. They're investigating, which basically means they're already preparing to fire her. Eudora inhaled slowly. I don't want anyone to lose their job over this, Celeste scoffed. Ms. Hale, she was ready to throw you off this plane like you were sneaking in here without a ticket. She didn't even check properly before making a decision. Why should she get to keep her job? Eudora tilted her head slightly. Because people only change when they're given the chance to. Celeste hesitated. And if she doesn't change? Eudora gave a knowing smile. Then she won't be getting back on another plane, will she? Celeste sighed, leaning back. You're too patient, Ms. Hale. Eudora chuckled softly. It's not patience, dear. It's just knowing that the world will handle things how it sees fit. She looked toward the front of the plane, where Madison sat, unmoving, her hands clenched in her lap. She had no doubt the woman was struggling right now, likely fearing for her career, possibly even regretting her actions. But regret meant nothing if it didn't turn into change. As the plane continued through the sky, the world below them was already shifting. And soon, Madison Keene would have to decide which way she was going to fall. The low hum of the engines filled the cabin, but for Madison, it might as well have been silence. The weight in her chest felt suffocating, like someone had tightened an invisible grip around her throat. She shifted in her seat, her hands clenched into fists in her lap. But no matter how much she tried to steady herself, the reality remained the same. Her career, everything she had worked for, was hanging by a thread. She stole a glance toward first class, but the curtain separating the cabins had already been drawn. She was cut off from the section she had once controlled, from the passengers who had been under her care just an hour ago. Now she sat among the very people she had always dismissed as background noise, the travelers who shuffled past her while boarding, the ones she rarely paid attention to unless they needed something. And now, she was one of them. Her pulse jumped when she heard the unmistakable sound of a flight attendant approaching. Her body stiffened, expecting Jonas to return and humiliate her further. But instead, it was Hannah Lowell, another attendant who had been working in economy. Hannah had always been friendly, always soft-spoken and efficient. But when she stopped next to Madison's seat, there was something unreadable in her expression. "Would you like something to drink?" she asked simply. Madison blinked. She wasn't expecting that. She hesitated, her throat dry. "Water, please." Hannah gave a small nod and handed her a plastic cup, then lingered for a second. "Rough day?" Madison nearly scoffed at the understatement, but she swallowed it down. She didn't need pity. She didn't need kindness. What she needed was a way to fix this before it was too late. "Something like that," she muttered, taking the cup and gripping it too tightly. Hannah tilted her head slightly, as if debating something. Finally, she said, "People are talking about it, you know." Madison's stomach twisted. "I figured." Hannah nodded toward a few passengers who were casually scrolling through their phones. "Some of them already know your name. You might want to prepare yourself when we land." Madison's throat tightened. Hannah studied her for another moment before stepping back. "If you need anything, let me know." And just like that, she was gone. Madison stared at the untouched water in her hands. Prepare herself. For what? She already knew what was coming. The moment they landed, she'd be met at the gate by management, maybe even security. She'd be pulled into an office, asked to explain herself, forced to sit through an uncomfortable meeting where she'd try to justify why she had questioned Eudora's seat without proper verification. And then, they'd fire her. She knew it. It didn't matter that she had worked for the airline for nearly 10 years. It didn't matter that she had followed policies her entire career. It didn't matter that she had always been strict with first-class passengers. None of it mattered now, because the world had seen what she had done. And the airline, they would never choose to defend her, overprotecting their image. She exhaled sharply, finally taking a small sip of water, but it did nothing to soothe the burning in her throat. Meanwhile, in first class, Celeste was refreshing her phone, watching as more and more people flooded the airline's page with comments. She smirked as she turned to Eudora. "Looks like you're a trending topic, Ms. Hale." Eudora sighed. "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" Celeste grinned. "Maybe not, but it's proof that people are paying attention." Eudora folded her hands in her lap, watching as Jonas moved through the cabin, handling service as if nothing had happened. That was the thing about moments like these. People moved on quickly. The world would keep spinning. The airline would make a statement and the news cycle would eventually shift to something else. But Madison Keene, she would carry this forever. Celeste scrolled through the comments, her eyes skimming over posts calling for the airline to fire Madison, for policies to change, for better training for employees. Then, she paused. "Well, this is interesting." Eudora glanced at her. "What is?" Celeste turned her phone slightly. "Someone just posted a follow-up. Apparently the airline hasn't just placed Madison on leave. They're already pulling flight records to see if she's done this before." Eudora's brows lifted slightly. "So, they're digging deeper?" Celeste nodded. "Looks like it. If this isn't the first time she's acted like this, she's done for." Eudora exhaled slowly. She wasn't sure how she felt about that. Celeste, however, had no such reservations. Karma's fast today. Back in economy, Madison's phone vibrated again. She hesitated before pulling it out. Another notification. But this one wasn't just from social media. It was from her personal email. Her breath caught when she saw the subject line. "Notification of formal review. Immediate response required." Her stomach turned as she opened it, reading the words that sealed her fate. "Ms. Keene, this email serves as an official notification that you are now under formal review by the airline's compliance board. Effective immediately, you are suspended from all flight duties pending further investigation. A meeting has been scheduled upon landing to discuss next steps. You are required to report to management upon arrival at the gate. Failure to comply may result in termination." Her hands trembled slightly as she read the words again. Suspended. She wasn't just removed from this flight. She was officially being pushed out. Her chest tightened as she realized how fast everything had crumbled. This morning she had been a senior flight attendant, moving through her routine like she always had. And now? Now she was watching her entire career slip through her fingers. She turned off her phone and let her head fall back against the seat, staring at the ceiling. For the first time since the flight began, she felt something she wasn't used to. Powerless. Madison's breathing grew shallow as the weight of the email settled over her like a heavy blanket. Suspended. The word echoed in her mind, louder than the hum of the engines, louder than the murmurs of passengers scrolling through their phones, louder than the racing thoughts she couldn't seem to control. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She had spent nearly 10 years with this airline. She had been strict, yes, but she had always followed the rules. First-class seats were premium, meant for paying customers, meant for people who belonged. Was it really so wrong that she had questioned it? But no matter how much she tried to justify it, the facts remained the same. She hadn't questioned anyone else. She hadn't even looked at Eudora's ticket before assuming she was in the wrong seat. She had embarrassed a woman, publicly, loudly, without giving her the basic respect she would have given any other first-class passenger. And now she was paying for it. She swallowed the lump in her throat, gripping the armrest as turbulence shook the plane slightly. Normally, she would have reassured passengers, walking through the aisle, making sure everyone felt secure. But now, she was just another passenger gripping the seat, waiting for the landing. Meanwhile, in first class, Eudora sipped the tea Jonas had brought her, her movements slow and deliberate. She wasn't one to gloat. She wasn't someone who found satisfaction in watching another person's downfall, but she was someone who believed in consequences. "Ms. Hale, you might want to check this," Celeste murmured, turning her phone toward her. Eudora adjusted her glasses and read the screen. The airline had just issued another statement, this one more serious than before. "We are conducting an internal review to ensure all passengers are treated with fairness and dignity. Effective immediately, the flight attendant involved in the incident has been placed on indefinite suspension pending investigation." Celeste smirked. Indefinite suspension. That's corporate talk for, "We're waiting until people forget so we can quietly fire her." Eudora exhaled softly. "I never wanted to cost someone their job." Celeste scoffed. "Ms. Hale, you didn't cost her anything. She did this to herself." Eudora said nothing, though deep down, she knew Celeste was right. Jonas walked up just then, adjusting his tie before addressing her. "I just got word from the captain. When we land, airline security will be meeting us at the gate." Eudora frowned slightly. "For what purpose?" Jonas hesitated, glancing toward where Madison was seated. "They'll be escorting Ms. Keene to corporate offices for a formal hearing." Celeste leaned back, raising an eyebrow. "So they're not wasting any time." Jonas shook his head. "Not when it's already in the public eye." Eudora pursed her lips, shifting in her seat. This situation had taken on a life of its own, far beyond what she had expected. She hadn't asked for this to become a spectacle, but that's exactly what it had become. Back in economy, Madison's stomach twisted when she saw Jonas speaking with Eudora. She knew exactly what was being discussed. She wasn't stupid. Her career was slipping further through her fingers with every passing minute. Then, as if things couldn't get worse, another notification appeared on her phone. "Missed call. Airline HR department." Madison's breath hitched. They weren't even waiting until she landed. She stared at the phone, hesitating before finally clicking on the voicemail. "Ms. Keene, this is Patricia Langley from Human Resources. We need to speak with you immediately upon landing. Please check in with your supervisor at the gate. We are also notifying your union representative regarding your suspension." Her entire body went cold. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist. This wasn't just an investigation. This was termination-level action. She glanced around, trying to keep her breathing steady. But she could feel it, passengers still watching her, the judgment heavy in the air. She turned her head and locked eyes with Frederick Lane, the older gentleman who had called her out earlier. To her surprise, he didn't look smug. He simply shook his head, as if to say, "You did this to yourself." Madison turned away, pressing her fingers against her forehead. For the first time since stepping onto this plane, she felt something new. Fear. Meanwhile, the plane began its descent, and Eudora fastened her seatbelt as the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our final approach. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and tray tables are secured. We'll be landing shortly." Celeste stretched her arms slightly, her eyes flickering toward Eudora. "Are you ready for the circus waiting at the gate?" Eudora sighed. "I didn't ask for a circus." Celeste smirked. "Well, you got one anyway." Eudora stared out the window, watching as the city below came into view. She had spent her whole life moving with grace, handling things quietly, never making a fuss. But today, the world had forced her into the spotlight. And for Madison Keene, her long fall from power was about to hit the ground. The plane descended smoothly, but inside the cabin, tension gripped the air like an unseen force. The usual excitement passengers felt when landing was missing. Instead, there was an unspoken anticipation. a silent understanding that something was about to unfold the moment those wheels touched the ground. In economy, Madison clenched the armrest, her fingers digging into the fabric as she swallowed against the tightness in her throat. The notification from Human Resources felt like a ticking clock, counting down to the inevitable. The airline had already made its decision. She wasn't an employee in waiting. She was a liability they needed to eliminate. Her heart pounded as she thought about what was waiting for her at the gate. Would they pull her into an office? Make her sign paperwork? Would they try to humiliate her further by walking her through the airport with security at her side? The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through her. She had worked too hard for too many years to go out like this. She gritted her teeth, willing herself to think. She had to come up with a way to fight this, to convince them that this wasn't worth firing her over. But how? She had always relied on rules, on policy, on the authority her position gave her. But now, those things had been ripped away. She was just another employee under review, disposable. Meanwhile, in first class, Eudora adjusted her seatbelt, her fingers brushing over the gold wedding band she still wore after all these years. She had kept quiet most of the flight, letting things play out the way they needed to. But deep down, she wasn't sure how she felt about what was about to happen. She never wanted a spectacle. She never wanted revenge. But she had also never wanted to be humiliated in front of strangers, treated like a problem that needed to be removed. She sighed softly, glancing at Celeste, who was still glued to her phone. "Well," Celeste said, tilting the screen toward her, "I hope you're ready to be on the news tonight." Eudora's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Celeste smirked. "Someone in the airport already leaked that corporate is meeting this flight. Journalists are going to be waiting at the terminal." Eudora exhaled, shaking her head. "This is getting out of control." "No," Celeste corrected, crossing her legs. "This is what happens when people don't just accept things anymore." Jonas, who had been standing near the galley, cleared his throat as he approached them. "Ms. Hale, I just wanted to thank you for your patience during all of this. I know it hasn't been easy." Eudora smiled gently. "I appreciate that, young man." Jonas hesitated before speaking again. "I also wanted to let you know, Captain Vaughn was pretty upset about what happened. He's going to be filing his own report once we land." Eudora lifted a brow. "Is that so?" Jonas nodded. "He doesn't tolerate crew members who mistreat passengers. He told me himself that this is the kind of incident that makes the airline look bad. Not just because of what happened, but because it was preventable." Celeste chuckled. Translation: Madison just made his job harder, and now he's making sure she pays for it. Jonas sighed. "Something like that." Eudora simply nodded. She had never been the type to demand consequences, but she believed in accountability. And for the first time, it seemed like it was actually happening. The intercom crackled as Captain Vaughn's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have now arrived at our destination. Please remain seated until we reach the gate and the seatbelt sign is turned off. On behalf of the crew, thank you for flying with us today." The plane taxied toward the terminal, and Madison felt like she couldn't breathe. She could see it now, through the tiny window, the flashing lights of airport security waiting near the jet bridge. There were people standing just outside the glass walls, cameras already lifted, reporters murmuring into microphones. She was about to walk into a public relations disaster. Her mouth went dry. Passengers in first class exchanged glances, some adjusting their posture as if they too were preparing for something unusual. Celeste nudged Eudora lightly. "Ready to step off the plane as a legend?" Eudora sighed. "I just want to step off as a person who got to sit in her seat." Celeste grinned. "Well, too late for that." The seatbelt sign dinged off, and just like that, everything was in motion. Madison sat frozen as Jonas's voice rang through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our destination. We ask that all passengers deplane in an orderly fashion. First-class passengers may disembark first." The first-class cabin stood immediately, not in a rush, but with purpose. Eudora stood gracefully, lifting her purse onto her shoulder. Jonas offered to assist her with her carry-on, but she waved him off with a warm smile. She didn't need anyone escorting her anywhere. She had walked through life on her own 2 feet, and today would be no different. As she stepped toward the aisle, something unexpected happened. Frederick Lane, the businessman who had called Madison out earlier, turned to her and gave a small nod of respect. The woman with the sunglasses from earlier, who had stayed silent, whispered, "I'm sorry you had to go through that." Passengers who had sat quietly the entire flight now looked at her with acknowledgement, as if realizing they had witnessed something they shouldn't have ignored. Eudora didn't hold it against them. She knew change never started with a crowd. It started with one voice that refused to be silenced. She gave them all a gentle nod before moving toward the front of the plane. And as she stepped through the doorway, she felt the heat of flashing lights and cameras waiting just outside the gate. She was no longer just a passenger. She was the moment. Behind her, Madison remained frozen in her seat, her hands gripping the armrest as she watched Eudora disappear down the jet bridge. She wanted to run. She wanted to hide. But there was no escaping this. The world was waiting for her, too. And this time, she wasn't the one giving orders. She was the one being summoned. Madison's breath felt shallow as she watched the passengers leave, each one stepping past her without a glance, without a second thought. She wasn't part of their world anymore. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the seat in front of her. She wasn't ready to face what was waiting beyond the plane door. She knew the moment she stepped into the terminal, her life as she knew it would be over. The curtain separating first class from economy had been left open, and she could see Jonas standing near the exit, making sure passengers were disembarking smoothly. He didn't acknowledge her, didn't look in her direction, but she knew he was aware she was still there. The aisle was emptying fast, and soon she'd have no choice but to get up. She turned her phone over in her hands, debating if she should check it again. Maybe corporate had sent another email. Maybe there was still some way to fix this before it got worse. But deep down, she knew. There was no fixing this. She had spent years controlling the space around her, dictating how things should run, making quick judgments and enforcing rules. But now, for the first time, she was at the mercy of someone else's decision. And it terrified her. A voice broke her thoughts. "Ms. Keene." She flinched slightly and looked up. Jonas stood a few feet away, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You need to deplane." She hesitated. "Are they waiting for me?" Her voice was smaller than she wanted it to be. Jonas didn't sugarcoat it. "Yes." Her stomach twisted. She gripped the armrest, but her body refused to move. Jonas sighed, stepping closer. "Look, I don't know what's going to happen when you step out of this plane, but I do know you're making it worse by sitting here like you're a victim." Madison's head snapped up. "I am a victim. This is all happening too fast. One mistake shouldn't cost me my career." Jonas stared at her for a long moment, then exhaled through his nose. "One mistake?" He let out a humorless chuckle. "Madison, you didn't just misread a ticket. You didn't forget to serve a drink. You humiliated a passenger for no reason. You made an assumption, and you doubled down on it even when she gave you proof." Madison clenched her jaw. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." "But it did." Jonas's voice was firm. "And now you're dealing with the consequences." She hated how simple he made it sound, how he acted as if everything was black and white. But the truth was, the world had turned against her in a matter of hours. She inhaled sharply, forcing herself to stand. Her legs felt unsteady as she reached for her bag. Jonas stepped aside, giving her space to move toward the exit. The closer she got to the front, the more suffocated she felt. She could hear voices now, beyond the door, in the terminal. The distant sound of cameras clicking. She hesitated at the threshold. "Jonas." He looked at her, waiting. Her throat felt dry. She wasn't sure what she wanted to say. Maybe an excuse, maybe an explanation, maybe just a chance to make it all disappear. But there was nothing left to say. Jonas held her gaze for a moment, then simply said, "Good luck." And with that, Madison Keene took her first step off the plane. She barely had time to adjust to the brightness of the terminal before she was met with flashing lights, murmurs, and the weight of dozens of eyes locked onto her. A cluster of reporters stood near the gate, microphones in hand. A few of them were already speaking into cameras, recapping the incident for the evening news. Airport security stood nearby, clearly instructed to escort her the moment she stepped out. And just a few feet away, surrounded by curious passengers and journalists, stood Eudora Hale. Madison's breath hitched. Eudora wasn't speaking to anyone, wasn't entertaining the chaos around her. She simply stood, her posture straight, her face calm. And then she turned, meeting Madison's gaze. Madison felt frozen in place. She expected anger, maybe satisfaction, maybe even amusement, but Eudora's expression was unreadable. For the first time, Madison didn't know what came next. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't in control. The terminal was a storm of flashing lights, murmured conversations, and the quiet hum of phones capturing the moment from every angle. Madison's chest tightened as the full weight of the situation pressed down on her. She had thought the plane was suffocating, but this was far worse. She could feel the cameras locked onto her, the reporters edging closer, waiting for her to react. She wanted to turn around, to step back onto the plane, to disappear before anyone could ask questions. But there was no escape now. Airport security moved first, 2 uniformed officers stepping forward. One gestured toward her bag, the other nodding toward the private corridor leading away from the main terminal. "Ms. Keene, we need you to come with us." Her mouth went dry, but she nodded stiffly. She wasn't under arrest, she knew that much. But being escorted like this, in front of cameras, in front of passengers who had once seen her as an authority figure, was humiliating in a way she had never experienced before. Then, Eudora took a step forward. Madison's breath caught as their eyes met again. There was no anger in Eudora's expression, no satisfaction, just quiet observation, the kind that made Madison feel even smaller than she already did. For a brief second, Madison felt the urge to say something, to defend herself, to explain, to plead for some kind of understanding. But what could she say? That it was just a mistake? That she hadn't meant for it to go this far? That she wasn't a bad person? None of it would erase what had happened. None of it would change the fact that she had humiliated Eudora, dismissed her, treated her like she didn't belong. And none of it would change the fact that the world had already decided she was guilty. The cameras shifted, their focus now capturing both women in the same frame, 2 people on opposite ends of the same story. Celeste, standing just behind Eudora, muttered under her breath, "Well, this is poetic." Madison swallowed, forcing herself to move as security guided her toward the corridor. She kept her gaze forward, ignoring the voices, the clicks of cameras, the silent judgment radiating from the passengers who had just witnessed her downfall. Just as she was about to disappear from view, Eudora spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, wasn't angry. It was steady. Ms. Keene. Madison froze mid-step, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. She turned slowly, meeting the gaze of the woman she had tried to remove from that plane. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Eudora simply said, "I hope you learn from this." No venom, no gloating, just a statement. A truth that cut deeper than anything Madison had expected. Because the reality was, this moment would pass. The world would move on. The internet would find a new scandal. But Madison Keene would have to live with this forever. And as she stepped into the private corridor, away from the eyes of the world, she knew. This wasn't just the end of her job. It was the end of who she used to be. The door shut behind Madison with a soft but final click, sealing her off from the cameras, the whispers, and the silent stares that had followed her since the plane landed. She exhaled sharply, her chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. The corridor was stark, cold, devoid of the chaos she had just stepped out of. But it offered no comfort, no escape. Two security personnel flanked her as they led her through a quiet hallway toward a small, windowless office, the kind of room that wasn't meant for meetings but for decisions. Final ones. Madison's footsteps echoed softly against the tiled floor. The silence was unbearable. She wanted to speak, to ask what was going to happen next, to salvage what little dignity she had left. But the words felt useless now. When they reached the office, one of the guards opened the door and gestured inside. "Please have a seat, Ms. Keene." She hesitated, gripping the strap of her bag tightly before stepping in. The office was small, clinical. A single desk, 2 chairs, a landline phone sitting untouched. No decoration, no warmth. Just a room where bad news was delivered. She sat down, her back stiff, her pulse hammering in her ears. Then, the door opened again. A man in a dark navy suit stepped inside, his expression unreadable. Daniel Henshaw, Senior Director of Airline Compliance. Madison had seen him before, mostly in corporate meetings, addressing policy updates and PR concerns. But she had never imagined she'd be sitting across from him like this. He took the seat opposite her, adjusting his cuffs before setting down a manila folder. The folder had her name on it. Madison swallowed. Daniel clasped his hands together, meeting her gaze. "Ms. Keene, do you understand why you're here?" She nodded stiffly. "Because of what happened on the flight." Daniel didn't respond right away. Instead, he opened the folder, scanning the top document before speaking again. "Because of what happened on the flight, and because of the way the public has responded to it." Her stomach twisted. There it was. It wasn't just about what she had done. It was about who had seen it. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "We've conducted a preliminary review of the incident, and I want to be very clear with you. This situation has escalated far beyond just a passenger complaint." Madison's nails dug into her palms. "The video of your interaction with Mrs. Hale has been viewed over 2 million times as of this morning. News outlets have already picked it up. We've had over 800 customer complaints filed against you in the last 6 hours. She gritted her teeth. "I didn't mean—" Daniel held up a hand, cutting her off. "Ms. Keene, intent is irrelevant. This is about perception. This is about what the world saw." Madison sat rigid, forcing herself to keep her expression neutral. Daniel continued, flipping to another document. "Furthermore, we've reviewed your past flight reports, and while there are no official complaints against you, we did find multiple instances of passenger discomfort due to strict enforcement of seating assignments, a pattern that raises concern." Madison's pulse jumped. "That's my job. I enforce policies." Daniel's gaze sharpened. "And do you enforce them equally?" She froze. The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Daniel let the silence stretch before sighing, closing the folder. "Here's where we stand. The airline has made its decision." Madison swallowed hard. "Here it comes. Effective immediately. Your employment with the airline is terminated." The words landed like a hammer. She blinked, her stomach plummeting. "You're firing me?" Daniel nodded. "We are terminating your employment on the grounds of misconduct, reputational damage to the airline, and failure to adhere to company values regarding customer treatment." Her hands clenched. "This is ridiculous. I've worked here for 10 years. I followed protocol." Daniel's expression didn't waver. "No, Ms. Keene, you followed your assumptions." The silence was unbearable. Then Daniel reached into the folder and slid a document toward her. "This is your official termination paperwork. We've already processed your severance package. You'll receive your final paycheck in 2 weeks." Madison stared at the paper, her vision blurring slightly. This was real. This was happening. Daniel folded his hands. "You have the option to appeal, but given the public nature of this incident, I strongly suggest you consider whether dragging this process out will serve you any benefit." Her mouth went dry. He was telling her to walk away, not just from the job, from the fight. Madison forced a slow breath, her mind scrambling for something, anything to say that could change this. But there was nothing. she had lost. Daniel stood, buttoning his suit jacket. Security will escort you to collect your belongings. Your employee access has already been revoked. And just like that, it was over. Madison didn't speak, didn't move. She just sat there, staring at the paper in front of her as the last piece of her career slipped away. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, she picked up the pen and signed her name. When she set the pen down, her hands were steady, but everything else inside her was unraveling. Daniel nodded, taking the document. "You're free to go," Ms. Keene Security stepped forward, waiting. Madison exhaled shakily before standing up for the last time as a flight attendant. She walked toward the door, her steps slow, her body numb. And as she stepped out of the office, past the security team, past the uniformed employees who wouldn't even meet her eyes, she knew there would be no coming back from this. Meanwhile, outside the airport, Eudora stepped into a waiting car. She glanced out the window, watching the flashes of cameras still lingering at the terminal. She had never asked for attention, never sought out a spectacle. But now she was part of a conversation much bigger than herself. She sighed softly, looking out at the city beyond the airport. She had fought so many silent battles in her life. And today, for once, the world had actually listened. If you liked this story, don't forget to hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. And if you want more stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a video.